Hello and welcome to another edition of Tuesdays with Liz, a Disability Policy for All. Today we have the great fortune to be talking to Maria Town, the Associate Director in the Office of Public Engagement at the White House. So welcome, Maria.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And we'll be talking to her about her job and what her job involves. So the first question is, what is your role at the White House?
So my role at the White House is to make sure that the disability community is connected to the things that are important to the president, and that the president is connected to things that are important to the disability community. So, for example, when we passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, I had to keep the White House informed of what the disability community thought about that piece of legislation, and if we kind of done right by disability and made improvements on No Child Left Behind.
Okay, thank you. And we are so thrilled that your boss has signed the law, the legislation.
Great.
What are the issues that the White House is working on that have an impact on people with disabilities' lives?
Well, one of the president's priorities right now is criminal justice reform. And so the criminal justice system includes things like jails, federal prisons, and the whole process of someone kind of becoming connected to the jail system and becoming incarcerated. The Bureau of Justice Statistics just came out with a report earlier this week that showed that 32% of all federal prison inmates are people with disabilities, and that 40% of everybody in jail are people with disabilities. So it's a huge number. And those are just the folks that we can measure, right? Because, you know, people have to actually say that they have a disability. So if they didn't say, then they're not measured. And for a lot of places, the largest mental health facility in a state is actually a prison. And so the president is really looking at how we can change and improve things like sentencing laws so that people don't have to go to jail for decades for a nonviolent offense, and how we can also make sure that once people get out of jail or get out of prison, that they have appropriate kind of employment supports, that they're not discriminated against in order to get a job, that they can receive things like counseling and mental health supports, and also that their families are supported, because having a family member or a loved one in prison or in jail can take a huge toll on the rest of their family. So criminal justice reform and what we call mass incarceration, so just like putting lots and lots of people in jail, is a huge disability issue. Wow.
Does this have anything to do with the prison pipeline issue?
Yeah, the school-to-prison pipeline. In July, the Department of Education and the White House, we hosted an event called Rethinking Discipline, and it was focused on looking at school discipline policies. The Department of Education came out with some wonderful maps which show the numbers of students being expelled or suspended from school by school district. And what the data show is that students of color and students with disabilities and students of color with disabilities are suspended and expelled at a super duper high rate. And what that shows is basically entry into the school-to-prison pipeline. So as we think about how we kind of reform the criminal justice system once people are already in it, we're also thinking about how we end that school-to-prison pipeline. Just to give you some new information, what we've also found, particularly with young girls, is that it's less of a school-to-prison pipeline and more of like an abuse-to-prison pipeline. Our Council on Women and Girls, it has a kind of new focus specifically looking at women and girls of color and other kind of underrepresented groups of women and girls, so women and girls with disabilities. And when they started looking at the school-to-prison pipeline, they found a common thread that women and girls who have experienced abuse are also more likely to enter the criminal justice system.
That's so interesting. And maybe this will fall into the next question. I know that big focus on President Obama's work has been around the gun safety,
mm-hmm.
and with all the shooting that goes on.
Yeah.
And then thinking about the Newtown, Connecticut shooting,
mm-hmm.
and does that have any connection to people with disabilities?
Absolutely. There's quite a few connections. First, I think we have to recognize that because disability is everywhere, right? 1 in 5 Americans are people with disabilities. So with all of these mass shootings, and to date, I believe there have been 355 mass shootings this year. So there have been more mass shootings in 2015 than there have been days in the year so far. And I hope that we can finish out this year without another mass shooting, but who knows. So there are definitely people with disabilities who are killed and injured as a result of all of these shootings and as a result of gun violence. But then for all of those people who survive, they might receive spinal cord injuries. They might become physically disabled as a result of experiencing gun violence. But then I think an even broader impact is for all of the survivors in the surrounding communities. They might develop things like post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a disability as well. So gun violence creates disability. And then when you look at shootings like the one in San Bernardino that occurred recently at the regional center where people with disabilities receive services, we see, you know, how badly we need kind of emergency training around disability in a mass shooting situation. And the community of folks who depend on that kind of service coordination that comes out of the regional center hasn't reopened yet. You know, they're still waiting to kind of get back into the swing of things, and they are currently scheduled to reopen January 3rd or January 4th, but we don't know if that's possible. So what's happening to all of those families who depend on those services? You know, so the kind of trauma and impact of gun violence goes far beyond the shooting itself, and disability is connected to that.
And how does it impact on people with disability? The regional center, the opening might impact on families, but it could impact on people with disability as well.
Right.
Is there anything else that I missed or that you would like to talk about the Office of Public Engagement?
The Office of Public Engagement is the office that helps to make the White House the people's house. For example, you know, whenever we do events, there's whole teams of us making sure that everybody is represented at the table, whether it's people with disabilities, communities of color, people who identify as LGBT, and we recognize that we can't have effective government without working in coordination with advocates and with people on the ground and with folks like you, Liz. And so I would say, you know, we really we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you think the president should be doing. One of the questions that I ask people who meet with me is, you know, what are your goals? What do you think the president could be doing? We have to think about kind of the executive authority of the president, especially in the context of a lot of things that require congressional approval. And so we spend a lot of time talking to stakeholders and figuring out what kinds of executive actions the president can take. We've got 13 months left. The president has said that a whole lot can happen in the fourth quarter. And so I definitely want to be hearing from groups of people with disabilities and different stakeholders to find out what they all think the president should be doing in these 13 months.
Thank you. And if you have any questions about this or any other policy issues, please go to the AUCD webpage and look for this week's In Brief. And if you have any questions about this edition of Tuesday with Liz, please leave them in the space below. Thank you and have a nice day. Thanks again, Maria.
Thanks, Liz.
Bye.
Bye.